And so
Awesome.
we seem to be a lot more pressed for time nowadays, right?
Oh my God, yes. I've actually been so recording requests are picking up, which is a good thing. And so I'm having, and also with networking and just so it's a good thing. Just happened to be double booked this morning. Um, well, actually, I wasn't double booked. I thought I was double booked, so it actually worked out because I was like rushing through breakfast when we were talking.
Well, here we are, episode 8 or 9,
One of them.
10 maybe.
I'm not gonna count anymore. Just welcome, welcome to our
Well,
chats.
so the thing is, you're doing logistics lens with more than just me now, right? So,
Hmm.
and no, that is a good thing that we get there, and or that you get there, because what's when you grow, it's going to help HTG. I mean, that's the
Absolutely.
way I have it planned, anyways, right?
Yeah. No, we have it planned. Although
Yeah, I shouldn't just say I, because it's never been just me. So,
I do think it's time for a microphone though. I do have my little microphones that I got. I have to test them to see if they're good, but I feel like this headset is choking my head.
yeah,
Either that or my head somehow grew.
I have a long list that seems to be growing, but at the top of that list, besides a new chair, at the top of the list is a headset for me
Mm.
to use, because now I'm finding myself on the phone so much. It'd just be better if I had something, and then the background noise won't be picked up as much. But then chair is number 2
That's
on the list,
true.
because I'm sitting on a folding chair right now.
Oh no, that's not good for your posture or your back, Bob.
So, well, and it's difficult to move. So, and then a chair mat for that as well. My new office I've been in, you'd think I'd already rent or purchased it a new chair, but I haven't. So I had one in mind for the longest time, but then it seems like maybe the size of the gaming chair and stuff isn't quite right, with the higher back and the
Mm.
reclining and all that might help me sleep at my desk. So,
Might make your Bitmoji
so
real.
yeah. So you remember that?
I'll never forget it.
No, no. So just trying to get settled in. I have so many things to do with the move, and getting the office up and going, as well as everything else. One final thing tomorrow on the move: close out the old place, and whatnot, and move my Bronco from garage to garage. So hopefully, my coordination and scheduling for that, works out okay. So, and there's not much room for error tomorrow, in the way I've got everything laid out. So, well, who knows?
Well, that's good. That's actually good. We were in one of the conversations I was just having. I was talking with a warehouse professional who has experience moving from warehouse to warehouse. Actually, Kevin Lawton from the new warehouse podcast, and I was telling him how I don't understand, like that's a new thing for me. So seeing the transition from Avenel to Elizabeth was a new experience for me. And so he was sort of going through what his checklist is for a warehouse move. And as he's saying it, I'm like remembering the move and I was like, "Oh wow, Bob did like all of those things." And I'm thinking, because for me, I'm impatient. If I was in charge of the warehouse move, as I told Kevin, I would have flipped that operation on its ass. So thank God, thank God I didn't do it.
There's so many pieces, and then every now and again you come up and you thought, oh, I forgot that.
Hmm.
Yeah, like turning off the water and sewer, or changing it and say, hey, I'm not going to be there anymore. So that's something I need to do. Now doctor's appointments. So if you were in one location and you had a doctor's set up, and maybe they were already an hour north of where you're
Yeah.
at, now suddenly and you move an hour further south, and suddenly you're now 2 hours away from that. Do you really want to go to a doctor that's going to cost you a 4-hour round trip drive, or are you going to take the time to find somebody else? So
Take the time to find somebody else. All those things go into the
so
move.
many things, so many addresses to change.
I
So
bet.
yeah, but so then where are we on today's topic?
Today's topic, I
Is
want to talk about the lack of industry operating procedures.
the lack of industry operating procedures.
Correct. And I will define what I mean by that because I think that there's, everyone might define this a little bit differently, and that's fine. But maybe not. You know what? You tell me what you think. So essentially, we have in our industry, I find that we have our big corporate businesses, then we have our small mom and pop shops. Depending on what part of the sphere that you are, the middle is it's got a few mixed in there, but there tends to be either really big companies or really small ones. Because of that, the each of these businesses, whether they be corporate or small business, they have access to different levels of resources. And so, for instance, corporate America, an ocean carrier, let's say, right, my experience, they're going to have access to a certain level of CRM, track and trace, booking products, a suite of stuff, including the team that's needed to manage said business. But when you look at a small business that's expected to work with someone that's the size of a carrier, their tools are going to vary based on essentially their business, their book of business, right? Because they'll only be able to invest in tools as much as their business is worth, or what they find to be reasonable. And so what I found, especially after having some conversations, especially with Jay, is that there's not as much of an industry standard that I would prefer to see. Like, I think a lot of the times when we're sitting here trying to, I think it's a good thing on one regard, in one hand, but then in another hand, I think it's a bad thing because we all have this sort of individual expectation of how we think the industry should work. And then when it doesn't work that way, or it doesn't benefit the business in the long run, now all of a sudden, it becomes a larger issue. And I really feel like it's time to address this because it's not just the lack of operating procedures in the industry. There's also the question of integrity, how business is done, and then also the accepting of responsibility when shit hits the fan, so to speak.
Yeah, well, we're always going to have that last part because there's a lot of people out there who just don't want to take responsibility for their actions. So.
Oh, well, that's true. I mean, and that's the human mind, right? Like we always want to place blame on somebody else, but
and the mentality of today, like everybody believes they're somehow a victim instead of just accepting. So
correct.
And when you bring up a valid point, and I think that because there's so many variations and of how people can work in this $8 trillion a year worldwide industry, that when everybody finds their niche, that's kind of where they stay. And whether they like it or not, they try to come up with some idea that they love it, because we all want to love what we do in some aspect, right? So for us optimists, we focus on the put this on do not disturb before it starts ringing out. We start focusing on the bad, then that it can bring down. When you got too many people doing that, it can bring down an entire organization. But the trying to focus on the good of what we do and the value that we bring is important. And when we have the regulations that we have in trucking or in warehousing and foodstuffs or whatnot, we feel like we're bombarded already with so many rules and regulations that standardizing things over and above that is difficult outside of those, because every little niche in trucking has its own little set of regulations that they have to adhere to. So typically people that are in refrigerated carriers don't operate the same as tank carriers. And those tank carriers, are they food grade or are they not? So we have all these different niches that we have to see everybody into, and try to standardize. So to have one big picture standardized operating procedure is difficult to have. So, and we even see that within the software, when the software is written for people. If they try to standardize too much, it's not going to be focused enough to make anybody happy. So software that we do, whether it's in warehousing or whether it's in trucking or whether it's in brokerage, needs to be somewhat, adapted to each little sector. Okay. So and then people are going to have issues because, I have issues all the time. I particularly with software, but
you and me both. I think what you're saying makes sense. And to further clarify, I don't think that the procedure should be something that I think it should be driven by logistics professionals, and it should be more so of a declaration of excellence, so to speak, where it's like, if this is what we say we are, this is what we mean. So 2 specific examples that I'll bring up. I know for a fact that a 70-30 split is common amongst agents and the brokerages that they work with. Why on earth are their agents still paying that 30% and they're not getting any tools from the brokerage?
Just the license?
Just the license. Okay. That's one. And number 2, why are forwarders or MVOCCs, whatever you are in this industry, why are they claiming to be digital and still running off of running their operations off of Excel spreadsheets? Like it's those types of things where I think we need to come together as industry professionals and say, just because you use a computer, that does not mean that you're digital.
Well, on different levels of thinking, depends on where you're at. So are you playing checkers or chess?
Yeah, well, that's true. But I think, I was thinking today after talking with Kevin and with some of my other peers over the course of yesterday, logistics is a trade. Colleges they're gonna pump out degrees, and that's great. Like anything you could learn, I think could benefit, right? Like I've learned so many different things that I've been able to apply to my career. But a lot of what we do, we learn on the job, because
yes,
certain disruptions at the specific time that they happen and the inconveniences that they cause, you just can't really simulate that, I don't think, in a classroom environment. Not unless it's being super simulated by logistics professionals who have, I mean, I don't know. I could probably jump down that rabbit hole, but I feel like
Penn State, for instance, has the transportation program. It's supposed to be one of the best, right?
Yeah.
And one of the first courses you have to take is lingo, right? So to where you're just learning what all the acronyms are and what they stand for, because and it varies from niche to niche. Other things like terminology is one of the things that bothers me, because it's like somebody grabbed onto it and then that becomes the definition of the word intermodal means that it's going from one mode to another. But yet when you say that word, everybody automatically thinks of trains, right?
Well, that's actually funny, because in trucking, I mean, in ocean, intermodal mostly is, so when I think of it, when I hear intermodal, I define it the way that you do. When majority of, depending on the team they were on or their book of business, they're saying intermodal, they're requesting a truck rate. And I'm just like, you got to say it. And acronyms. Maybe today is just the day that I go off the handle, Bob. But acronyms.
Okay. Well, logistics lens. So we are looking in there. What does it mean exactly?
What does it, the lingo? So I've also been having some mentorship conversations with professionals over the last few weeks, and I've really been enjoying them. Particularly the people who are experienced professionals but are new to logistics, because I was once at that exact point in my career. And there were some things that I found to be ridiculous, and acronyms was one of them. And I started to in the beginning when I realized that on my side of the business that we had acronyms for everything from port codes to terminals to surcharge. I mean, you name it, we had an acronym for, and it's still to this day. I don't ever see acronyms going away in shipping or logistics at all. They're
No.
just so deeply rooted into everything. But then I remember um like I had a couple customers throw out a couple acronyms at me, and when I asked them what they were, they were very superior. They felt like they had to acknowledge that I should know what that acronym is. And then I started to ask my peers who'd been in the industry longer than I have by like 5, 10, 15 years, and they didn't know what the acronym was. And I started to feel like, all right, there's also no standard acronym definitions either.
There's some
And
pages out there that you can look up, and they'll give you the list.
oh no, there for sure are. And I
There's just so
started,
many of them.
yeah, and I started to look into it because that's when I started to realize that logistics professionals could be speaking different languages within or different dialects of logistics.
Depending on essentially what niche they came up in
Yes.
as they grew in the industry. So yeah,
Yes.
different professionals have different meanings. So
Hmm.
for me, working in several different niches within the trucking sector and then some warehousing, I tend to learn a lot. And then having lived in several different areas of the country at the same time doing those jobs, because it can also vary by uh,
Region.
by region that you're in.
Yeah.
So
Which is also just an added layer. And that's also why I think to a certain extent I feel like that just also adds to what I was saying before, where logistics is it's a trade. You're going to learn a lot of that on. There's only so much you could simulate, I think, in a classroom environment, because once you're out there and you're in the thick of it, it's like games on, baby. Let's insert disruption here, there, different acronyms everywhere. And so when I'm thinking about different conversations, and really one of the biggest reasons I started to think about this, because it wasn't just with the conversation I had with Kevin, is that, and you and I have been talking about this a lot over the last few weeks, is creating a program that will help new agents succeed at HTG regardless of seniority in the industry, right?
right.
And how do you translate what we do, what they want to do, into a language that's universal? And so when you start to look at industry operating procedures, the way that the way that so many operate differently, um, it definitely starts to speak to quality of the experience that the customer is getting, that the agent is getting, that the team is having, um, and it just makes me think of the overarching narrative or tone that I find in our industry that is can be in my opinion kind of drab or negative, to be honest. Um, because I just I don't think anybody I don't think there's enough initiative from from voices in the industry saying we should accept this X as this. We should accept Y as this. You know what I mean? And start to set a standard expectation. And you know, maybe that expectation has a range, right? Because we all can't we're not where it's there's too much variation to be cookie cutter, but I think we should have some better standards.
Well, that comes a lot of that comes back to inspiring. So as we inspire the next generation, when we want to have some of those things, those are the things we need to talk to. Mentorship, inspiring, how we come back to that, and I don't believe that we put enough effort into the next generation. One of the things that I looked at when it comes to how to grow HTG, and then how do we keep from becoming like all the other conglomerates out there if we do and are able, I mean, if, I have a plan that we're going to be there, a timeline might be a little fuzzy, but, I think that when we look at the next generation, we need to have an understanding of that there's a difference between just hiring somebody straight out of college and putting them behind a computer and giving them a phone and saying, okay, this is your customer base. You're just going to coordinate their loads with, and then start calling them a professional.
Yeah.
Right. Because, or somehow they're different because they're an agent instead of, for that company when they're an employee, and really in a brokerage house, a freight brokerage house, when they're doing that, they're essentially a dispatcher,
yeah,
or a check caller, or because some people start out where all they do are call carriers and check for where they're at. You'd think we wouldn't have to do that nowadays with all the GPS and tracking and capabilities out there, but since not everybody's connected and no carrier is some of the brokerage houses with their software now are trying to force the carriers to use their app on their loads.
Yeah.
So drivers have all these different apps depending on who, what company they happen to be, or what brokerage house they happen to be pulling for, sometimes even shippers. Then they got to use a different app. And so if we were able to standardize some of those things, then maybe we would get a common lingo. But since,
or even experience, right? Because now I'm thinking about it. If I was if you're a small owner operator, or if you're an owner operator and you only have like one truck, the chances, hopefully, I don't know how many different customers they could be working with. Obviously that could vary, but if they have all these different apps that they want to work with, if I was a small business owner, if I was an owner operator, I would not want to work with 10 different customers that has me using 10 different freaking apps just to tell them where I'm at, when I can just drop them my my location in my iPhone.
Well, yeah, that's well, and that's why some of those, when you talk about the single truck owner operators, they make up a lot of a lot of the carriers nowadays, right? So and because of the way that things have gone, what happens with, there was a day and time when a freight broker was pretty much to truckers, particularly carriers, small to mid-sized carriers, were liars, cheats, and thieves. They would lie to the carrier and say, oh, well, we're not getting, this accessorial or whatever, or we can only give you $20 for using the lift gate, when meanwhile they're charging $60, right? And little things like that. And that's where the liars, cheats, and thieves comes in. They're always trying to pick the pockets of the trucker for so long. And I'm going to guess that the first 20 years of my industry in trucking, I was against brokers at all costs. But then when you take a look at how things have changed with technology, and then the talking, or how we all want to open some of these things up to, to see the vision of the carrier being able to see the real way that brokerage firms are managing that money, and being a true intermediary or a true partner, not just a partner to their own wallet, but a partner to the shipper, to make certain that they find good carriers that aren't double broking the work, that aren't, that are actually doing the work, providing great service, but at the same time taking care of their customer, their driver and carrier base and the trucks, so that to make certain that everybody's happy. And how do we get there? So when we talk about how the intermediaries are done, so when we go back to what my vision of what HTG is, it's about taking the small guys, right, and that give that white glove service to their client base, the white glove service to their carriers, because they know without their carriers, they can't service those customers. And so that in their little niche, they're able to find that. So then, so as HTG, as a corporation, the one thing that I don't want to do is have to compete with the agents that I'm bringing on in the different niches that they service, or their different service areas. I don't want to compete with them. So I don't think that it would be fair for me to take and try to build my own book of business, or my own corporate book of business within freight movement, and then hire people to manage that at the same time as I'm out there seeing what all my agents are doing in different areas and then trying to take the work with them and competing directly with them. I don't think that's fair. So we're only going to do one, and that's we're going to only have agents that are independent, and if they grow their business and they hire somebody, that's different than me growing the business and hiring somebody for them. So they're going to handle the operations, and then we'll handle the back office.
Yeah.
And I think the back office and providing all those tools that you were talking about, what is it that all these companies don't provide? Well, the one thing that most of them are getting to the point of the technology,
Yeah.
and to some of them to the point that where they don't even have people, that the truck drivers themselves, the guys that are looking at the load boards, are actually doing the work for the people at the company. That's what Convoy tried, right? So there's others out that are doing that same thing, where they don't have to hire as much support staff in order to, so they got people out selling, but meanwhile the drivers are the ones that actually doing the work. And I could name names on that in the way the software is done. I absolutely refuse to be that way. And so it's my job back here to find a way to find that balance between what they need, the assistance as an agent, right? And them being able to do their operations without having to worry about what's going on behind. So, taking care of the money, taking care of the credit, taking care of the making certain that the carriers are paid in such a way that the agent's carriers aren't going to have issues with that kind of thing. So that financially they're taken care of, and then being able to provide them the technology necessary to be able to do their job, and then the training, and being able to forward that, as well as the marketing, so that they can grow under the brand that I'm asking them to grow under. So and within their niche, and so it means that we have to build at the same time as we're building an agent base. We have to build the financial base, and we have to build the technology base, and
it's the infrastructure that makes it all run.
So without a good foundation, we can't get there. So in the beginning here, we have to talk to each of those agents that come on board and show them the respect that they deserve as being somebody who's taking the chance on us, and that we're taking the chance on them. So we got to, and then that's where we got to collaborate and build this great foundation that's going to allow it to happen more and more and faster and faster. So, but that it's important that our character, that our reputation is always thought of, and that's part of it. It's not just finance and technology and HR services or whatever, right? It's also our our character, and it can't be. So we want to be like in such a way that we're doing business on a handshake, in today's kind of handshake, not necessarily the old-fashioned way of literally a handshake.
Our word is our bond.
Yes, and following through and making certain that whenever an issue arises, that we're willing to take that issue, get it fixed, and make it right at the same time.
You bring up a couple of things that got me thinking. One was the liars, cheats, and thieves thing. And actually, that's what got me thinking about the lack of standard operating procedures. Because working for the ocean carrier, I've met a wide range of professionals, people I wouldn't trust with a plant, let alone cargo. I mean, I'm probably somebody you shouldn't trust with a plant, but I'm just trying to draw some comparison, I guess. I don't know where I was going with that.
Empty suits.
Yeah. Okay. So there we go. So, you have your empty suits, and then you have the people that have a high amount of trust. That you're speaking to somebody who is passionate, knowledgeable, and just you can have a good conversation with them. I'm fortunate enough to have met more of those people than of the empty suits, but that's not to say that the empty suits don't exist. And when I see them, I usually run in the opposite direction as fast as I can. But I think what got my whole thought process started was that because we're just now, I feel like getting the momentum, getting the conversation going around the sort of standards we should accept as an industry and as participants in the industry, there's room for those, for those participants that don't have the character, the integrity, that we would want in partners. And I feel like it's created from a partner and a small business perspective, it's changed my interpretation of the industry because I realized after chatting with Jay, I realized that there's a certain expectation level that I have when I'm having certain conversations, when I'm ready to continue the conversation of letting someone in to our business,
Mhm.
right? Like there's certain they and
Well,
I
so
start
on that, you've mentioned Jay several times. You want to clarify
yes.
who Jay is?
Yes. I was going to save that for a separate episode.
Okay.
But it's
Well,
okay.
you mentioned on it briefly because
I
you've mentioned
know
it now like 3 times.
I
So
have mentioned Jay like 3 times. So Jay is actually Jay is our newest agent at HTG. He is based in Guatemala. He is someone I've met on social, and so we're just in getting to know him and his experience and what we have to offer here. It's just drawn some realizations for me. And as the chief marketing officer at HTG and partner at HTG, I have high standards for what we're building. It's the only reason why I want to build it is because the partners that we have also share in those high standards. And so when it comes to bringing on a new agent or a new service provider of any case, it's like we want to make sure that um, we're entrusting them with a lot and they're entrusting us with a lot too. And this actually goes back to the other thought that I had that I was having a conversation I was having with a colleague. And I know I'm kind of bouncing around here, but it will come full circle as long as I don't forget my train of thought. Um,
well, that happens to me all the time anymore.
or at least once an episode. Um, is that she was saying, so she's worked primarily in small business. I'm not going to define the sect, I'll just keep her confidential. Um, that she's worked with so many varying levels of service providers that she's gotten to a point in her career where if she has to try somewhere new, she's not giving up her whole book of business as soon as she walks in the door just because they want it. And I what I didn't really there was a point in time where I wouldn't understand that because I've worked for companies that have overall performed well.
Mhm.
But now I'm at a point where I totally understand that because the books of business that I have managed, I cannot just take to a small company, so to speak, and expect that company to be able to onboard this business, these customers at the same speed as a large company would. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but then there's also service levels, reliability, different services and niches that exist within, these small businesses that she's working with. And I get where she's coming from. When she said that to me, a light bulb went off because I was like, you know what? Yes. And so as we're having these conversations, as HTG is going global, and we're expanding our footprint and our brand, it's it's something that I'm constantly thinking of because, and as I've said to you too, Bob, like I've done interviews with brokerages, and a lot of the times they don't want to touch an agent unless they're moving like $10,000 a week in revenue,
Right.
which I think does our industry such a disservice as well because just because you're moving $10,000 a week in revenue doesn't necessarily mean that there's a certain happy medium for profits and commissions. Um, and in addition, it sort of cuts out the availability for the person that's growing their business and looking for a place to call home for a long time, so to speak. Um,
Yeah, you bring up that point of the transition in a book of business because of different reasons,
yeah,
and it's tough uh, to go out there and not have that commitment, right? And that's one of the things that we've been doing at HTG is the book of business stays there, which brought me back to something I said earlier about HTG staying at the corporate level anyway, staying just the back office,
Yep.
right? Not competing with our agents. Because if we compete with the agents, then we're going to want them to have a non-compete when they leave. And then whatever customers they brought in at that time, their book of business is essentially lost to them for a year. We don't want that.
At
So,
least, I mean, it's like non-competes, and we should spend more time talking about non-competes as well. But I mentioned this during a conversation with a peer as well. It's one of the reasons I had to pivot into trucking to begin with, was because of my non-compete. And non-competes affect agents and businesses a lot more than we really think that it does. I think if you've been subject to a non-compete and then have been in a situation where it's, it needs to be adhered to, then you understand what I'm saying. But it requires, getting through a non-compete can change, it can change the whole trajectory of your career. And not to say that it didn't work out in my favor, because I got to learn a new part of the industry and I got to meet you, which who'd have thunk it, And so I think it all worked out the best way that it possibly could have. But, I don't necessarily know that others can say the same, And it's not that the road hasn't been bumpy for me, because I've had my own share of challenges along the way.
well, that's your willingness to pave your own road.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that willingness to essentially go out and pave their own road, and they want to follow somebody else's road, and that makes it more difficult to, and so they might excel in that environment of from company to company and starting over again. But for anybody who values their clientele, who values which is their book of business and the service level that they provide them, they want to be able to work with those same carriers. They want to be able to work with the shippers, no matter who is supporting them. And so to me, the corporation here at HTG is a support function, the back office support function. And we shouldn't be competing with, and I don't want to compete with. So, and as we come through with you, being in marketing, being the chief marketing officer for HTG, I'm still, in order to do that, if I could put all kinds of restrictions on what your ability to do and who you can interview and all these other things. But if I did that, would you be able to grow and flower into the marketing professional that you want to truly be, or would I be restricting that? So, and I don't want to restrict that. So your book of business, your revenue streams come from no different than where an agent's would. An agent is going to go out and they're going to seek out in their niche that they know and understand, the carriers that work it, and the shippers that are working that area, or whatever way that they find their clientele. And I want them to be able to do that. And that's how we all grow. And that's that inspiring excellence that, and that's making us those logistics professionals that we are. And as we continue to look at doing this, I'm growing as well. I'm learning what are the needs in each little niche. Some people have things that turn a lot faster, some turn slower, right? So I'm finding as I open the doors up for all these little areas off to the side, that it's allowing, if I put those restrictions on the CFO, would Deidre be able to go out in Indiana and continue to grow her business? How much would it cost me if I didn't allow her to do that? Yeah. Right? Just how much would it cost me if I didn't allow you to do that? But I think we can do it simultaneously. And as we, that's why we're going to have a whole array of services. And that's part of the trade and group, the Hatchway is the name, right? But the trade group is important in our name as well. The fact that we're working in trade, international trade, and that we're a group of professionals coming together to work together and collaborate together to achieve excellence, and achieve all of our dreams at the same time, no matter how small the book of business, no matter how big the book of business, we can all work together and we can all inspire the next generation.
And
So,
set the expectation for what we want out of the industry.
so we can develop what you were talking about there about a proper way of doing business and
Yeah.
some guidelines in order to be able to do that. And that's because each of us are going to essentially have our own set of guidelines that allow us to build that character. And I'm certain that there's going to be people, agents that come along that don't agree with how we're doing business. They might try something, but I don't have a restrictive contract on anybody
Yeah.
that way. So
Yeah.
we're all free to go our own way at any point in time. So
Absolutely.
you know
Absolutely. And I think that's so important. And knowing that, non-competes have sort of just been overruled by, by the feds. It's definitely something to keep in mind. And I think that anytime we receive non-competes as part of a job offer, um, there should be a whole new level of consideration that goes into that role, because it's not just what happens while you're there. And of course, everything feels, sunshine and rainbows when you're signing the documents, so you don't really want to put that thought into it, especially if you've been out of work for a long time, or for any period of time. But we really have to think about what happens, what could be the consequences on us as the individual for taking that non-compete. And I can tell you from experience, depending on how you look at it, you could be off course for a minute. You know what I mean? Depending on how each individual defines off course. I would say for a little bit I was off course because I had no idea what to do in that situation until it all sort of came together. But
So I'll bet when you were actually looking for a job, and I put quotes up, a
yeah,
job, you were putting as much, if not more, effort into trying to find that next job as you've put into creating your own book of business. A book of business doesn't have to be something that's just selling freight services. So, and we're all in sales in some aspect, even
yeah,
though, it's another one of those areas where for most of my career, I thought of it as liars, cheats, and thieves. It's like you go into the car dealer, you go into a car dealership, and some of the people that they're so pushy when they get there, and then they try to over talk you in everything, and every little thing that you try to say, they want to counter it with something else to try to make you feel, get on the proper emotional path to get you to
mm,
buy,
yeah. I
right?
can't. I've never been able to relate to those. That's not the type of if you're new here, that's just not the type of sales that I am. And if you're not new here, then you know that I'm just completely different than that. I can't. And
Yeah.
I can in the language that people use, I can smell it on their body language coming from a mile away, and I'm just like, I'm out. I don't want any parts of this.
It comes a lot of times it comes across as some type of arrogance or forced arrogance, right?
Actually, yeah.
I mean, there are some people who are just so arrogant they don't know it, but it's just natural to them, right? And so when they sell, it's a little bit different than the people who are forcing it.
Yeah.
And and it takes a long time for some people to get to that point that you can talk about all the good things with somebody, but you just being able to ask that question, or the hard question that brings it into the sell situation, right? A lot of people don't want to do that. So when I see some of these being on LinkedIn as much as we are nowadays, you see all these people talking about leadership and coaching and all the different ones. And they all come from different aspects and different backgrounds, and they're all trying to push some of those things onto everybody. And the ones that are able to make I think make the hard questions seem easy, or the hard part seem easy, and just kind of flow through it like it's natural, are the ones that are actually excelling. And then as they try to get other people to do that, it takes work to get there. So, and we have to understand along the lines that when we're talking to people, whether we're trying to find agents or whether we're trying to find a shipper or a trucker, it can take hundreds of times of doing something just to find the one that's the right fit, because we're all so different. And we want to be comfortable with each other in the work that we do, whether we're working with a shipper, whether we're working with a carrier, whether we're, selling life insurance, or whether we're trying to do marketing. We need to be comfortable in what we do. So, sitting here in front of the camera and just talking to a camera, how do we look at that? Do we want to look like we're talking to people? Do we want to look like we're off to the side? Do we watch the screen? Do we watch ourselves talk? And then what's it look like to us when we're looking at ourselves in the screen?
Now I'm
instead
super
of looking at
conscious of it. I'm like, am I looking at the dot?
So so all these little things, and it takes time to get comfortable in everything that we do. So, and also it comes back to the beginning of what you wanted to discuss, and the title of this, inspiring excellence. We have, in order to do so, we have to be extremely comfortable in what we're doing. So it means we have to do it, is it 100 times? Is it 1,000 times? Is it 10,000 times? They say for somebody to become an expert, they need to put 10,000 hours in, right? So, that's a lot of time to put into to one thing. To become an excellent or expert in multiple things, that's for everyone, it's another 10,000 hours. But how does that round that out? So how do we look at doing all these things in order to help inspire the next generation to come there? Do we do boot camp style things where we're trying to force different way or our way down somebody else's throat, like it's a one size fits all thing?
So that's the thing too, and that's another thing that I find interesting about logistics professionals, where I do think that there needs to be, I don't know exactly, but I'll just continue on the train of thought and see where we go from there. But so in my roles, I've handled import and export for all trade lanes that the carriers have ever offered. So whether it be, US exports, to Asia, US imports from Asia, Latin America, in and out. Whatever that carrier is selling has always been a part of my portfolio. I have some peers that have only ever worked very, very specific parts of that world. So, for instance, only imports from Asia. And so for me, I think that's kind of where I've always been different. But not only that, where it's like they only want to work in that niche. And I understand why, because imports from Asia, that's the bread and butter. TPEB, that's the bread and butter of the ocean world. And, at least it was at one point. And it still is, even though the margins aren't what they used to be. But for someone like me, who has always had my hands in a little bit of something, I've needed different resources. I've needed different sort of training. How do you put someone who sells import and export on an import team? How do you put someone who sells all trade lanes on a team full of people that primarily sells TPEB? It's like you can't. It doesn't make sense. And so this is like part of the ongoing thought process, and I've been in this long. The way I think about it is like I'm writing a thesis, and my thesis is coming together, but it's sort of, I haven't quite figured out what the thesis is exactly, but there's one part of the project where I've put together the needs of my clients and my prospects. Then there's the other part where I'm putting together resources for them to be able to access and grow their careers when it's called upon. But even when we're in it, I think it's unrealistic to expect a logistics professional to be super streamlined. Like, when you go into McDonald's, or maybe this, I think, when in the back when they're making burgers, it's a, what do they call that? It's like a conveyor belt, pretty much. You get the bun moves to the next person, then they put their little mayo, they put the patty. It's a
Yes. And you're going to have a difficult time of it. And Henry Ford he did that when he developed
Yes.
designed the Model T, and where there's an actual terminology for that, and it's on the tip of both of our tongues, and we
Yep.
can't.
It's going to come at some point. However, there's certain ways in which that works. I just don't necessarily know how realistic that is anymore, because I think that's when you start to see the gaps of knowledge. And then I've seen situations where the knowledge gaps ends up being perceived as a weakness. And it's like, they're not, it's not, it shouldn't be shocking that someone who's been in the industry for X amount of years, only in a certain role, doesn't, or maybe hasn't, become well versed in another part of it. But
Well, I
I
think
find
and let me interject here real quick, that I find that a lot in the larger corporations.
correct.
People get hired into a thing and then they're stuck there in that niche, and they
Yeah,
don't know how to get out of it, even when they have to go look for another job, and they don't know how to speak to the other points.
that's true.
And
That's
and
true.
and so they're kind of, and so many people think of it as it's like, if you come out of college and you're hired to be an agent, right? And you go in, and that's what I was talking about earlier, about, they give you these are your customers, these are your carriers, get the loads that they give you, get it done, but they've
Yeah.
not really explored anything else about